Hello, my name is Alex Isles and welcome to the Great Hall of Newcastle's Castle. Now, the first thing to start off with on this video is that the name, the Great Hall, is actually a Victorian name. During the Middle Ages, this would not have been referred to as the Great Hall. Instead, that would have been another building outside of the castle keep. So just outside of the castle and down today where we have the courts and the Vermont Hotel, next to there would have been the Great Hall, which was a two-story building. The top level would have had a hall inside, and that would have been for feasting and eating and drinking, a very sociable space. And underneath that, on the ground level, there would be kitchens, there would be wine cellars, food stores, and it was very much a place to have food and drink and almost like your social activities involved down there. Up here, on the other hand, in the hall of the castle, this would have been a space for the king, the monarch. You may have still had eating and drinking in here, but not in the same way as you'd have had in the Great Hall, which would have been very much your social side. So that would be where you would want to make friends with the lords and the barons and bring them together and have a social space there. But up here in the Great Hall, this is where the king holds court. This is where royal power is given. This is where people are knighted. This is where oaths of fealty are taken and land is distributed and given out. So it's a very much an official place, kind of like a courtroom today, or like wherever the king is. That's also where you can hold parliament. That's also where you can have court cases that are very high end. You know, those sort of really important decisions happen wherever the king is. And this room here actually has a lot of influence with this Anglo-Scottish wars, and it's very important in both English and Scottish history. But just before we do that, I'll show you some features of the room that I like talking about. So to start off with, we have some wonderful banners right here on the wall. So we have the royal banner of England. Then we also have the Ogle family right here, the Umfraville banner. We have the Nevilles, who were an incredibly powerful family in County Durham, and one of the Nevilles was actually given the moniker the Kingmaker because he was able to decide who would become monarch. And then over here we have the Lords of Northumberland, the Percy family, and both the Nevilles and the Percys, sometimes they were friends, sometimes they were enemies, sometimes they would marry each other. So the best way to describe them would be the modern term frenemy, sometimes close allies, sometimes enemies, because they were looking to become the most powerful families in the north of England. The actual structure of this hall would have been quite different in the past. So up around the banners, you can see holes in the walls. Those smaller holes are actually where, in the past, there would have been the medieval roof for this hall. So that would have gone up there, and everything above that would have actually been outside. So that's the medieval roof, and anything above that is open to the elements. The holes you can see that are massive down here, just below the banners, those ones are just following around the room here, they're actually from the English Civil War, or as it should be known, the War of Three Kingdoms between England, Scotland and Ireland. There would have been massive oak beams put across there, and they would have actually rested cannons on that level. And when they rested cannons on that level, that was because at the time, parliamentarian forces had actually taken Gateshead. And so the castle was being used as a firing platform for the royalist cannons to fire out at Gateshead at the south bank of the River Tyne, opposite Newcastle. And so that's there for the royalist guns to fire out on the parliamentarians, and in the same way the parliamentarians were firing back at the royalists at Newcastle as well. So there was a bit of a conflict going on there as well in the history too. I mentioned before that this hall had seen important events that basically had an effect on both English and Scottish history, and it's because in the hall here, this is the location where Edward I, Edward Longshanks, also known as the Hammer of the Scots, took the oath of fealty from John Balliol, who became King of Scots. Now this had all been caused in motion because the last King of Scots had died. And when he died, his closest relation was Margaret, Maid of Norway, who was the daughter of the King of Norway, and her mother had been a Scottish princess. So because of that, she comes across from Norway to England, and she's going to marry Edward II, which would therefore bring together the English and Scottish dynasties and maybe would have resulted in a united kingdom back then. Reality is he probably would have had 2 sons, and one would become King of Scotland, one would become King of England, and there would have still been a lot of warfare going on in the kingdoms anyway. But it's nice to sort of tie up history romantically and go, oh yes, England and Scotland would have been one nation together even back then, when in matter of fact, obviously, we've had long conflicts that have resulted to us becoming the United Kingdom you see as today. And even with all of the politics going on in the world, I think you can say that most English people and Scottish people get on really well and just see ourselves as a part of the mixture of peoples in the British Isles. But what happens is that Margaret, on her way over from Norway, passes away, and so she can't marry Edward II. When she can't marry Edward II, the Scottish nobles start coming together and trying to figure out who has the greatest claim, and eventually boils down to 2 families, the Balliol family and the Bruce family. So you've got John Balliol and you have Robert the Bruce. What happens is that those 2 men are then invited by Edward I, who has a very deep interest in who's going to become the next King of Scotland, and they start talking it out, and what happens is that John Balliol probably makes some nice deals with Edward in the background, and Edward decides that actually Balliol should be King of Scots. And so he's made King of Scotland. Edward comes up here to Newcastle, Balliol comes down, they have a feast, and Balliol pays homage and swears fealty to him as King of Scotland for his English territories. And there's a lot of things going on there, but this would have been quite common in the Middle Ages, because Edward I also had to swear allegiance to the King of France for his French territories. And so because of that, there was always this thing going on where, would the King of France have seen Edward as, you know, as his sub-king? Would he have considered England as a part of his territory? Probably not. But the way that Edward I interpreted this swearing of fealty was that John Balliol was his vassal, he was his sublord, and he was the High King of all of Britain, you know, England, Scotland and Wales all together, and he was the over-king, whereas John Balliol was under him as a sub-king. John Balliol probably, on the other hand, probably heard it slightly differently and saw it as like, oh, I'm swearing fealty for my territories in England. This then resulted in a long war. John Balliol was seen as a bit of a puppet king, and he's actually referred to as the hollow cloak, which is in Scots, which is not a very nice thing to say to someone. It's just like, look, you're just wearing the mantle of a king, you're just a puppet. And so Balliol lost his throne, and it started the Anglo-Scottish wars. Bruce fought, and eventually Bruce becomes King of Scots. And so inside this room here, that's where one of the events that caused the Anglo-Scottish wars and so many of those conflicts that lasted for, you know, hundreds of years across the borders with raiding and bad blood between both sides was just caused by an event here where Edward I sat in this room and just listened to, you know, Balliol swearing fealty, but it had a very different meaning for both men. Alongside this here, we have another room. So I'll just take you up here, just off the Great Hall. And this room here is what's considered a very pleasant prison. And you'll look at it and go, this doesn't seem very pleasant, Alex. But this here is a prison just off the side of the Great Hall. Now this prison here is, because it's off the side of the Great Hall, would mean it's very easy access for someone to be able to come along and they'll be imprisoned inside here. But they've also got access to the Great Hall as well, so they can be taken down to the Great Hall and be a part of events in there as well. And it's also quite a high status prison, because just along inside here, we've actually got an ensuite toilet or a garderobe. So just here you've got a loo and then the prison itself. And so this would have probably been for very high status individuals to be locked inside here and kept inside here under lock and key, but they were still nobility or very important individuals. So you would probably have a nice bed in here, probably some form of entertainment, and they'd be allowed visitation rights. But at the same time, if we just look down in here, you can see the hole where a large beam of wood would have gone across the door to stop them leaving any time they wanted. And it's very likely that Robert the Bruce's sister, when she was captured, was kept inside of that room. She's the sister to a man of royal blood, a man who has a claim to be king, and so she can't be harmed, but you want to make sure that you have her so you can control her brother. And so she was likely kept in there, but brought down here for events, for social life with the other lords and ladies, and she wouldn't have been kept in a dungeon or anything like that because she's a high-status woman. At the other end, which is not a prison, right through here we have the Queen's Solar, or the Queen's Room. And this isn't actually, there isn't any evidence to suggest that this was actually a bedroom for a royal woman, but it's definitely the high-status room for travelling female and male royals. So when the king visited Newcastle, this is the room he would stay in. This is where Edward I would have stayed. This is where other high-status lords and officials would have had their bedroom. And when they would have stayed here, obviously, just like in the prison, you've just got off this room its own ensuite toilet as well. So just there, another toilet for the royal bottom. And then just along here, you would have come back into your room where you would have had a very nice bed, and it would have been an incredibly comfortable and high luxury room for someone who is so close to the Great Hall, where this is an incredibly powerful place of politics. The room is also special because you've got this fireplace. And this fireplace is one of the oldest fireplaces in England. It dates back to the the Norman period. So it's a late Norman fireplace, and you've got these wonderful features in it that just a part of Norman architecture. And I love that we've got this old fireplace right here in this room that has lasted from when the castle was built all the way through in this really high status room, which would have been warm and comfortable, and a place where then a royal could come out and hold court and make decisions that would have a massive impact on nations, but also on history as well. So I really hope I've been able to show you around the Great Hall of Newcastle's castle, tell you some of its stories, show you some of the things inside here, and explain why I love it so much, and why it's had such a big impact on both English, Scottish, and European history. I hope you'll join us for another video in the near future. Until then, stay safe and well, and I look forward to seeing you soon.